I was, and I'm actually going to go a bit now. I was in tears on Newington Green because it's like, for the first time in 14 years, somebody is treating us like we've got capabilities, that we can do it.
Hello and welcome to Oh Good, What Now? The first podcast we have recorded in a Labour Britain. I'm Dorian Lynskey. I'm going to introduce the panel and ask them when they stopped following the coverage. First, Ros Taylor.
I'm afraid I was a bit of a wimp and I was in bed by around 1 a.m. because I knew I just couldn't pull an all-nighter, much as I would have loved to, and I had loads of stuff to do today. But I was up again by 5:15, so I didn't miss. Well, of course, I missed some really good stuff. I did miss some really good stuff. I'm sorry, but at least I saw Liz Truss.
I mean, that was beautiful. And Andrew Harrison, how did you fare?
I made it to 6 o'clock in the morning because we did the live stream here, which is fantastic fun. It was so exciting, so energizing, and I wish we could do another general election tomorrow. People loved it. Thank you to everybody who watched and also donated. That was brilliant. But at 6 o'clock in the morning, I was sort of walking down an empty street, kind of on my own, and the sun's sort of starting to come up. It's very post-rave. Birds are singing, and then I just looked at my phone. It's that Rees Mogg has got his. And it was strange because I didn't have that sort of feeling of elation. It wasn't a Portillo air punch. It was like, well, there we are. That's it. It's done and dusted. It was a poignant moment.
Well, I got to bed at 7 because people kept telling me Truss was going to lose her seat. And I have to say, where I was, there was a sort of small gathering. Mogg very much was a Portillo moment. It was like football.
Oh,
it was people leaping out of their seats and going, yes! So that was quite magical. I lacked the sort of the melancholy, elegiac quality of
you had a Euro 96 moment. I had a 28 days later moment.
Yes.
It was quite like that.
Ros, we were on stage at the Tabernacle for a live show. Thanks to everyone who came before moving on to the live stream. And that was when the exit poll came out and everybody was very excited. But there was one little curiosity, which I want to return to in more detail later. The exit poll put Reform on 13 seats, which was a real shock. And everyone was like, which 13 seats? They ended up with 4. And because the narrative has to get going before most of the results come in, they start coming thick and fast around 2, don't they? So you've got this weird kind of limbo. And that limbo seemed to be full with, Reformer on the march. Do you think that was a real shame and kind of like a problem in setting the tone early on?
It completely was, and partly because the programmes had space to fill, and so they talked about that, and it was frankly a bit of a downer. And then, of course, the first 2 results were from Sunderland, in which Reform did pretty well, scarily well, to my mind, and I remember wincing when I saw their vote totals. Yeah, it was very hard to shift that fear. And then the BBC had a Reform spokesman on that I was watching who was talking the most absolute load of shit, but nonetheless was listened to in a very serious way, in the kind of, right, you're a player now, aren't you, way, which I did not enjoy. Maybe that was why I had to go to bed early. I just couldn't at that point. I thought, no, can't handle it.
It was really annoying the way the kind of search for a story, the search for a new story, something novel, played exactly into the hands of what Reform wants. All the stuff Farage is coming out with today about this is a growing revolt. We're going to build this resistance movement, all the rest of it. The television media, particularly the BBC, went right in on that. They could, if they had been conscripted to do it, it couldn't have gone better.
Some people were saying, well, that's the real story of the night. I think the real story of the night was the Labour landslide.
Yeah.
It was here's the worst Tory result in the history of the party, the worst drop in support between elections ever for any party in the history of British democracy, wiped out in Wales. 4 of the 5 seats belonging to the last few prime ministers were lost. Sunak's was the only one that was not. Mm-hmm. And in fact, because the exit poll was slightly off, we'd asked at the live show, I gave the audience like sort of brackets. And do you think it's going to be under 100, 100 to 125, whatever? Most people went for 100 to 125. When we saw the exit poll, it's 131 for the Tories, this is. It was a bit like, oh, it's a bit higher than we were expecting. Actually, the audience was correct. The scores on the doors And I think there's one still waiting for a recount, but we're broadly there. Labour 412, the Tories 121, Lib Dem 71, SNP 9, Sinn Féin 7, Independent 6, DUP 5, Reform UK and the Greens both at 4. That's why everybody was talking about the Greens all night. Plaid Cymru 4, SDLP 2, then the Alliance, Ulster Unionists and the Traditional Unionist Voice all at 1. The Tories lost seats that they had held since the 1880s. Like there was a lot of kind of like, oh my God, we are literally going back to the Victorian era to make sense of these results.
It was acceptable in the 1880s, yes.
So Ros, here's the weirdness of it, right? At the moment, it seems that Labour got a 33.7% share, famously 40% in 2017. That was a real famously, not a Rishi Sunak famously. But they got 412 seats versus 262 then. And some people will be like, what goes on? Just kind of like explain like how Labour managed to turn that lower share into this extraordinary result of seats.
Labour managed to make their vote far, far more efficient. And essentially that means that Labour got elected all around the country. And that is something which I think the detractors and the naysayers should bear in mind, because it's actually really good news. They had a huge comeback in Scotland. They even have, I think they won a seat in Cornwall despite the Lib Dem surge in the southwest. They won big, obviously, in the Midlands, in the north, and in the south, particularly.
Whitney, Cameron's old city.
I know Oxfordshire is now completely Labour, and that is really important to this story, because it shows that this is a party that has been elected on a national scale. It's not a party that's just been elected by England, like we always used to have with the Tories, where Tory England, and that's gone now, and that is very important. And it also means that it appealed to a wider range of people than, frankly, the previous incarnation of the Labour Party did. The other reason, of course, they did so well is because people did vote tactically, and they voted tactically often for the Lib Dems, which kicked out a lot of the Tories in places where the Tories needed to be kicked out.
Well, it has to be said, Andrew, that obviously a lot of people are going, well, this does sort of expose kind of what a weird system first past the post is, which is true. It is weird, and I can understand people agitating for proportional representation, although the people that have discovered it sort of like during this campaign have less patience.
Never mind this campaign. This morning, there are so many converts to PR. It's incredible. People who apparently had always believed it forever and ever, but only today feel comfortable talking about it.
And it's so weird that they didn't say that when Boris Johnson won a landslide.
And those people might also want to bear in mind that if we did have PR and we were in coalition building territory at the moment, it is entirely possible that a Conservative Reform coalition could be taking the lead.
But doesn't it show, Andrew, that Morgan McSweeney, like Starmer's chief strategist, is somebody who I think, politically, he's probably rather more to the Labour right. He is a ruthless character by all accounts. But if you play the rules of the game you were given, right? Yeah. You're not playing for maximising your percentage. You're playing for maximising your seats, and the efficiency of this is just absolutely extraordinary. And so you were seeing Labour majorities fall in very safe seats. And in fact, some safe seats, we'll talk about that later, were lost entirely. But oh my God, it was like every vote counts. And I think like I said, I don't necessarily share his sort of political leanings, but you've got to admire the kind of the ruthlessness of that strategy.
Yeah, and also I wonder whether there's an element of five-dimensional chess going on here, in the sense that not just must we win, but we must be seen to win everywhere, because we'll come on to talk about Starmer's speech in a minute, but it was a speech for the whole nation, even specifically talking to people who did not vote Labour. It was the theme of the speech was service. The theme of the speech was national renewal, to bring everybody into this project. And I'm wondering whether the depth and the subtlety of the tactics here was such that we need to not just win, but we need to create something that goes even beyond the basic political mandate into a full national, a popular mandate for the project, not just the policies.
Ross, it seems to me that we're in a completely different world. That one of the features of 2017, one of the reasons why Labour got 40%, was that it was, more than any election for a long time, essentially a two-horse race. I mean, obviously not in Scotland, but in overall UK-wide, it's like the other parties just sort of fell away, and it was like Labour, Tory, and this is one of probably the distorting effects of Brexit. And now we're looking at a multi-party country, and then you've got the independents. It's just like you can't compare this election to 2019 or 2017, whatever. It's just so radically different. There's actually, I think the third party vote, if you add it all up, is higher, the highest ever, which includes like 1983 when you had the Liberal SDP alliance.
Yeah, and that's essentially because the Lib Dems have been detoxified. It is now, it seems, long enough since the coalition, long enough since the tuition fees betrayal, as many see it, for the Lib Dems to have made a comeback. And despite the things people may have said about Ed Davey and his adventures in theme parks and other places in the campaign, he has managed to cut through. He basically did a 1-2 where he said, right, I'm going to get people's attention by doing stupid shit, and then I'm going to talk about some serious issues that they care about, like social care. And it was quite simple. And it's really, really cut through. There were other things as well in the mix, like filthy water, the water companies, which I think really animated the Lib Dem vote to an extent that Labour need to realise and fix as soon as they can. But that was going on as well. And then, of course, there was Gaza too. And that played into the results
Before
as well.
going on to Gaza, the idea of Ed Davey and his stupid shit, I really believe that stupid shit isn't stupid shit. Ask Boris Johnson. He built his career on stupid shit. And the behaviour, all the stuff that Ed Davey was doing, it really telegraphed the idea that, Starmer is saying, I'm a different kind of politician. We've turned the page. I think Ed Davey was saying the same kind of thing. It's like, politics does not have to be either venal and cruel or boring and anal and terrified of looking ridiculous. We always hear, would you go for a pint with this guy? Well, I'm not sure I'd go for a pint with Ed Davey, but I'd certainly go paddleboarding with him.
Yeah, he was
He's
hanging
a very
out.
likeable man.
He was hanging out with ordinary people and, people in care homes, people, he was really getting out there and clearly enjoying himself and mixing with a range of people in a way that Sunak and Starmer didn't quite manage to do.
And the British people do have a soft spot for someone who doesn't mind looking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Do you know what's weird, though, is that I think the percentage of the Lib Dem vote, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, is not that different from 2019.
Wow.
And again, everyone was like, oh, Joe Swinson's blown it with the rejoin and all that. It's not that different. Again, it's all about like efficiency. And so you've got this weird thing. I can't remember who I copied this from, somebody on Twitter. But they said, there's all these reasons for the low vote share. It's the fact they were targeting the strategy, right?
Yeah.
Tactical voting. Then partly the narrative of a supermajority, like you can sort of take a risk if you're on the left, particularly Gaza, which we will return to, and of course reform, eating into some of Labour, the people who would have voted Labour because they don't like the Tories, and then found a more natural home. But one of the arguments that was being made by the sort of anti-Starmer left was like, well, in trying to get these other people, these sort of Tories in Whitney. You are losing the left. And I think that's certainly true. But then what we've seen is, because of the electoral map, is that you're essentially losing the left in, broadly speaking, Labour seats. Not entirely. They did lose some. And you're gaining so much more. So I'm sure it is absolutely maddening. If you're on the left, you just feel, well, we're being sidelined and taken for granted. If you're being like totally brutally strategic about it, you're like, well, that was the right call.
Yeah.
But we should talk about what happened on the left, right? Because Labour lost Islington North to former Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn. Maybe the shock of the night for Labour was Jonathan Ashworth losing in Leicester South. They also lost Blackburn and I can't read.
Did you write this at very late at night?
They also lost Blackburn, Densbury, Batley, Birmingham, Perry Barr, West Streeting, and Jess Phillips were in
that
really
was a real
right
shocker.
spots.
Yeah.
Now, and of course the Greens in Bristol, ousting Carl Denyer ousted Thangam Debonair. Now, in some of these, there were very good reasons. The Greens are very popular in Bristol. Corbyn is very popular in Islington North. But I live in Islington North, and I was seeing a lot of kind of Palestinian flags and watermelon signs. Like a vote for Corbyn is a vote for Palestine. That's by no means the only factor that explains that margin of victory, and fair play to that campaign. But it certainly played into it. It certainly played into it. The Greens win in Bristol, and it specifically, of course, played into some of these wins where the independent was, this is my issue. How much should we, how long term do you think this is? Because we've seen Brexit change everything, right? And you can't explain 2017, 2019 without Brexit. But now, obviously, that isn't a factor, essentially. Is this just a temporary thing? Could you almost go, well, look, if October 7th had never happened and Israel never responded in the way it did, would we be looking at something completely different on the left? And what we talk about as what the left has done to Labour is largely this issue.
It may be. And the fact that George Galloway lost his seat, small cheer for that.
Big cheer.
Big cheer.
Delighted by that.
Yeah, is a good sign that people, I think, may quickly realise that some of these independent candidates, and I can't speak for them all yet because I don't know how well they'll perform, but they may not be in a position to do the best for their own constituencies. They may, be single issue candidates who have campaigned on the Gaza thing. The Gaza thing, I think, it is objectively worrying that there are a lot of people in this country who think that making a protest vote on Gaza is going to somehow change Britain's posture towards Israel, because there will be tweaks, and I think there might be a ban on British companies exporting to Israel, for example. The Starmer will do a few things, but it's not going to change that substantially.
Do you mean arms or in general?
Yeah, arms.
Yeah, because the idea of a general ban would be, I think, unconscionable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, arms. And there will be, in the next few days, I predict, quite a lot of people on the right, Telegraph types, who say this is a sign of a divided Britain where we have whole constituencies of Muslims who are voting solely on this issue. I see it slightly differently, and I hope a bit more optimistically, although initial conclusions are pessimistic. Because I think that the people who voted in that way, as Keir Starmer suggested in the speech he's made today, are so disillusioned with mainstream British politics, and they simply don't believe in the ability of national politics at a national scale to make a difference, that was why they cast their votes in that way. And that's why I'm optimistic that they can be brought back to the point of view that actually casting your vote on the basis of national issues is a worthwhile thing to do.
I'm also a bit optimistic because I'm going to make a rash bet that at the next election, please God, Gaza will not be what it is now. That we will not be seeing this horrific spectacle, and also this horrendous dilemma of, appalling things are happening. Many of us want to support Israel's right to defend itself, but is this defence? It's not.
In 2019. Obviously, Labour essentially lost the Jewish vote, and now it's back. And there's a Jewish candidate that's won in Finchley, and I didn't see any attempts at going Labour and anti-Semitism. Just seemed to kind of fizzle.
Yeah,
and because they had done the work, and I think that they've lost a significant proportion of the Muslim vote, and I think largely to do with Gaza, and largely to do with that kind of like fumbled LBC interview. So I wouldn't want to read too much into this is sort of the future, but I do think that work has to be done. But I think it could definitely be done because we've seen it happen with other groups.
Yeah,
Andrew, there was a lot of tactical voting. I think the supreme example of untactical voting was very upsetting because at the live show we all named our potential Portillos, and I think we got maybe like 5 out of 8. But what we didn't get was one of mine, which is Ian Duncan-Smith in Chingford and Woodford Green. Faiza Shaheen lost the Labour candidacy, very controversial. She decided to run as independent. They got almost exactly the same, 12,000 each. Put those together, Ian Duncan-Smith would have lost by miles. And it was absolutely heartbreaking that literally the left there had split 50-50.
It wasn't heartbreaking. It was fucking enraging. I thought that was the product of a tantrum. And when you've got a block of people who spend 5 years saying, shut up and obey the wishes of the democratically elected leader, a candidate is deselected. Fraser Sheen is deselected. I thought she was done rather dirty. I felt a little bit of sympathy for her, but her behaviour afterwards, in putting herself and her own faction ahead of the good of the party, effectively handed a man who should have been out on his arse another term in Parliament. And I know that somewhere out there, in the unlikely event that the people from that chunk of the Labour Party listening to our centrist dad and centrist mum podcast, they'll be saying, ha, 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 the salty centrist dad tears of Andrew. I'm fucking furious about it.
I'm not a centrist. No, but the thing is, it's a two-part thing, right? You can say, oh, well, Farage should not have run, clearly.
Yes.
But then Labour should not have handled it in such a way that made her sort of so determined to run and made 12,000 people want to vote for her. It's like, I thought that was fucked up from the start, and that sympathy you had was just like, oh, this seems to be really mishandled. And you can go, oh, well, what she should have done was taken it on the chin and gone back to her day job. Well, sure, but it's like, it takes two to IDS.
Yeah, sure. But, you can take it on the chin and you can go and be part of the renewal of the Labour Party. We've all seen people from more extreme wings of various parties throw themselves into the work and kind of become useful and viable future candidates. She's young. She's got it. I think she's a talented politician. But I think this exposed a fatal flaw, which is narcissistic egotism and factionalism.
Well, there's two sides to every story.
Yes.
Except on that side of the table. No, but I mean, that was just so shocking. I thought it was a lesson. It was a real lesson, because I think the huge difference between that and Islington North is that the Islington North is so left-wing that there was no prospect of splitting the vote. It was literally like either Corbyn wins or Labour wins. There is absolutely no chance on God's earth that this was going to let the Tories in. So fine. Like he could run against Labour, fine. Whereas there, it was like, oh, but between them, they threw it away.
But I'm just like, there are quite a lot of, you were talking yesterday about what you don't want to hear is the crowing. You don't want to hear the crowing of certain figures. There's a whole lot of crowing going on. And I just think, well, congratulations. You made Ian Duncan Smith an MP for another 5 years. Okay, you've got Corbyn in. Fair enough. It's probably going to happen anyway. Considering his record of effectiveness as a backbench MP, I don't think it'll make any difference to anything at all, frankly. But you've done material damage here to the reconstruction of the country, and I hope you're proud of yourselves.
That was depressing. There was a whole depressing period of the evening, which then kind of was swept away, wasn't there? Where lots of stuff. The Suella Braverman got in, and Jonathan Ashworth lost his seat, and I think this happened. For about half an hour, everyone was like, "It's unraveling," and it was like, "No, it ravelled."
But not to sort of harsh your mellow still further. I fear that this is going to be the modus operandi of the next few years, that the job of the Labour semi-detached left is simply going to be to frustrate Starmer for no other reason than it's Keith Stormtrooper and they hate him.
You can see that from certain commentators for sure.
Can you tell who it is yet, listeners?
To be expected. Ros, moving to Scotland, I vowed no predictions on the live show, right? Which was good, because I'd written down, just goes, I think the SNP vote will hold up surprisingly well, despite their troubles.
Whisper it.
The SNP are making a comeback. And it was an absolute disaster, like a giant collapse, a humiliation. Were you more surprised than I was? Can you sort of explain, like, what happened?
No, I wasn't. I think the collapse of the SNP has been surprisingly fast. But they haven't helped themselves after the departure of Nicola Sturgeon. They then appointed Humza Yousaf, who clearly wasn't really up to the job. Now they've got John Swinney. John Swinney's a perfectly decent bloke, but my God, he's boring.
He makes Keir Starmer
look like Ziggy Stardust.
And to be honest, if you're an independence movement, right, the one thing you need more than anything else if you're an independence leader is fire in your belly. If you're a nationalist, you need to have that rally round me, because I may not have the answers to everything, and I'm certainly not going to be immediately in power, but I believe in this, and I'm going to show you why I believe in it. Whereas Swinney is frankly a caretaker. And he looks like one, and he's been around for a long time. There was nothing new about him. And then, of course, there's just deep unhappiness with the way that Scotland has been run. Now, there are things about Scotland which the SNP can't control. Things that affect the whole country, and the collapse in public services generally. But the fact is that Scottish schools, for example, are doing worse than English ones, which doesn't go down well. Poverty still very bad in Scotland, despite all the SNP's efforts to turn that around. They haven't managed it, and I think people think, well, the SNP have had their time, and Labour have been out of power in Scotland for long enough.
I talk about Scotland with like my sort of heart in my throat, because I don't know enough really to get into it. It is a universe of its own.
It's the bit at the top of the country.
I know, I've been there. It's a lovely place, great place. But the one thing that just seems to stand out is that this is the curse of when you have a rock star leader briefly. Sturgeon was a rock star. She was an incredible campaigner, with stupendous charisma. Do you remember the days when people down here would be saying, oh, why can't she be the leader of the Labour Party? Isn't she brilliant? You know, she was a phenomenon. And bigger than the SNP. And this is what happens when the phenomenon takes you too far, and then they flame out, and you're left at the top of the mountain with no idea how to get down again.
I'll be very interested to see what happens, in the next election or two, because I think the SNP could definitely, come back.
Anything can happen, Dorian.
Anything can happen. Ros, I want to ask you about the Green Party, 4 seats, same as Reform, lower vote share than Reform, alas. Do you think that this is going to kind of put a little bit of pressure from the left and obviously from caring about the environment on Starmer? Because there were certain places where like Bristol Central,
yes,
where that is a very left-wing city, and they were just like, we want the Greens variety. And I felt like throughout the night there was very little conversation about the Greens.
Yeah, the Greens are absolutely delighted because they aimed for these 4 seats and they poured resources into them, and they got them. It was a winning strategy as far as they borrowed some tactics from Green parties in Europe as well, and they learned from those. So the Greens are very happy. What do they now want? They want to apply enough pressure to Labour to really go forward with the green transformation, as Greens tend to talk about it, and there will be tensions there, which are not fully played out and even fully explored, I think, by the Greens themselves. Labour's policy, of course, is pro-growth, pro lots of investment in renewables and the energy grid and all those things. There is inevitably a tendency in the Greens to want to say, growth, we don't need growth. Economic growth is damaging. We can't continue growing. We need to stop or even do the reverse.
Well, it's a broad church, the Greens.
Yeah, it's a broad church. And also they're not wholly keen on the huge levels of private sector investment, which the Labour Party is going to be depending upon, frankly, to fulfil its green agenda. Then, of course, there are going to be the tensions over actually putting this stuff in place. Solar farms, wind farms, things like huge pylons that connect our grid up with the North Sea, and it is going to create problems not just for the Greens, for Labour seats as well in these areas, and there are more Labour seats than we expected around the kind of home counties as well. There's going to be a dissonance quite often between what the National Labour Party wants and what the individual MP is being told on the ground by their constituents. And that's going to be a huge tension, but it's going to be a particular tension for the Greens because they haven't yet fully reconciled those tensions within their own
We've got
party.
The climate Greens, and then you've got like the NIMBY Greens.
Yeah.
And I met a Just Stop Oil activist who got into activism through opposing HS2. And I was like, oh, I don't oppose HS2. Like, I support what you're doing. regarding climate change. And I thought these really are in tension because some people don't want the wind farms ruining their views and so on.
But it's not just views; it's nature.
Yeah,
a lot of
nature.
Greens just love nature, and they are
do
all
love
about
nature.
They're really into it.
conservation. And when you build new stuff, you have to destroy nature sometimes. And we've seen this. I see this in North London a lot when a tree is cut down by the council. The outrage, that people get so passionate about it, and I expect a lot of latter-day swampies to be in action.
But isn't this a problem of when a party grows and ceases to be a single issue, kind of a protest group with one MP or, a series of coming seconds, when they become a presence in politics, they kind of have to decide whether on the political continuum they sit. Are the Greens a very, very left-wing or a centre-left or a moderate left or even a centrist organisation? I used to think this about the SNP. If the only thing that unites you is you want Scottish independence, what are you? If you're a conservative Scottish independence or a socialist Scottish independence person, at some point that tension starts to chew away. And I wonder whether that's the kind of moment that the Greens are at. Are you a deep Green? Are you a degrowther? Are you a Dale Vince? Let's build green energy, which will probably be bad for voles and hedgehogs at some point.
And you'll see it with social justice as well, because they've also gone very big on the need for housing. Zach Polanski talks a lot about it, but he's also anti-building anywhere on the green belt.
Yeah, but it's good. These are kind of grown up challenges and
growing
decisions.
pains.
Andrew, we have I've deliberately kept reform back here till later in the show. Now, some people were saying, one person, who I think because being Corbynite did not want to give Starmer any credit, has all said the big story of the night is reform. We have had UKIP MPs. We have had the Brexit Party doing very, very well. We've had both those parties sweeping the European elections. I'm not sure. Yeah, sure, Nigel Farage is in Parliament now. I'm not sure that those groups were not radical right, and this one is, and that this is essentially like Le Pen getting in. And I honestly don't know if that is a significant change, particularly since this has all happened in a few weeks, right? This has all happened since Farage took charge of his limited company again. And there's a great deal of novelty. There were a great deal of people that wanted the Tories out, and particularly some of these kind of, people who would have gone Labour, the sort of people who left Labour in 2019, and they're going, oh, good, we don't have to go back to Labour. We can vote reform. And I'm like, they've got 4 MPs, and these are the same guys that we've seen do rather well in their previous guises. Like, how worried, are you about like the future? Do you think they can build? Farage is not a great manager of people. These people famously do not get on that well.
Well, I'm always worried about the future. I've been worried about the future all my life. I think partly you do have the rock star effect again. We may detest Farage, but he was worth 6 points in the polls overnight because he is a national figure. Though it sticks in the craw, he is possibly the most consequential political figure of the past 30 years since Thatcher. We just have to accept that. The degree to which we loathe him is a measure of his success and a measure of which is like by his I'm not going to say his base because it isn't a base in the same, but the kind of pool that he's fishing in. But you're right, he has absolutely no interest in other people, let alone managing teams. This is a party leader, stroke company leader, who's in the past slagged off his own talent base as incompetent weirdos. Not a great
slagged off Clacton.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if he's going to be a great surgery MP.
No, but there is that sort of duality of nationalists and populists, which is you have to simultaneously say your country or constituency is the greatest thing on the planet, and also it's failing, fucked, ruined, and insoluble, and only you can be the person who brings anything back to it. So these are the sort of two horses that people like that have to ride. You're right. He's going to be a terrible surgery MP. I think the performance will be similar to what it was in the European Parliament, not turning up, not doing the job, doing a whole lot of speeches and being photographed sinking pints. Ticey's in, 30p Lear in. One of the comforting things I read overnight was somebody on Twitter saying, Reform are coming second in a lot of formerly Tory places. This is what a split on the right looks like. If the natural home of the right-wing voter is such an utterly discredited, decayed, shattered shit show, they're going to look for something on the right to vote for, and it doesn't have to be competent or even coherent. They had the free hit of being able to put forward a manifesto that was just away with the birds. It was fantasy craziness, but it doesn't matter because
it's not a party.
Yeah, the voters knew they were never going to have to enact any of these things.
But as I think Robert Colville pointed out on Twitter, that if you add, I think they came second in 166 seats, right? And if you add those 166 to the Tories' 121, you assume that literally every single Reform voter in the country would have otherwise voted Tory if only they were more right wing, which of course is absolutely not.
There was loads of
swings
nonsense from Labour
they would still have lost. And so I'm not saying, of course, one should always be worried. We should always keep an eye on people of that political persuasion. But the idea that we're sort of like 5 years away from jackboots and Whitehall, I felt was a little of a bit of an overreaction.
Well, something to look out for, I suspect, is that Starmer's speech, which again we'll come to, was for the nation, for everyone. Even if you don't support me, I will serve you. Join the project. And I think that'll be characterised by a lot of bad faith critics on both left and right as Starmer's just pandering to the kippers, isn't he? He's pandering to reform. Well, there are other ways to bring those voters on board rather than going, let's set up barbed wire fences in the middle of the channel. That's not, there are ways to, if you are in a neglected, left behind constituency in this country, which has been doubly insulted because you were given levelling up, which turned out to be just a nothing burger, you can go to those constituencies and offer to actually enact the improvements to their lives and not just pander straight to the...
Well, I worry because there's one prominent broadcaster who her name was basically just said, almost like as a tossed off comment, it's just like, well, obviously he's going to have to be really hard on immigration. It was like, do you know what? Have we not seen... Like, there has to be sort of a fair settlement, right? But you have we not seen that if you do the things that the radical right like, it doesn't put them back in their box. The Tories have been doing loads of things that Farage likes, and that didn't stop Farage from... Sorry, Ros.
I mean, two things about that. I think that's an understandable reaction because I think the vast majority, if you look at what Reform voters care about, number one issue is immigration. And they're pissed off because they got their Brexit, but it didn't lower immigration. In fact, it did quite the reverse. And for them, immigration is the source of all evils in this country, is a source of, the housing crisis, the NHS. And, you can argue with them till they're not blue in the face.
It's kind of teal, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, teal. But that's what they believe. So that's one point. The second is that this shows that Starmer has not sealed the deal, because if he had sealed the deal and if people had felt, these people who are voting Reform now, had felt that he represented genuine change, they would have voted Labour. So he has. Now, I think there's all kinds of reasons why they haven't. One of them, for example, is that it's very hard for mainstream politicians to cut through in the same way as they used to during election campaigns, because quite simply, not everyone watches the same media anymore. Some people are entirely watching their own media and entirely preoccupied with a particular concern that reflects their own interests back at them. So I think that's going on. The other thing that I do want to say is that if you look at it historically, Labour administrations, left-wing administrations in general, tend to be tougher on immigration than right-wing ones. They're just nicer about it. They just don't do all the nasty right-wing rhetoric that we're so used to. But they are tougher. And that one of the reasons for that is because right-wingers tend to be quite tolerant of businesses saying, we want more cheap labour and we want it now. And it may well be that the rhetoric softens, but immigration nonetheless falls.
Well, let's talk about TV, because obviously we've been a little bit critical of the Reform obsession and the broadcasters. I was watching the party that I was at. It was Sky all the way, and enjoyed the chaos energy of Kay Burley, who just says, I'm not sure you're meant to say. And she was at some point, because, not as guarded as, well, Labour's, it's a landslide, but it's very fragile, turnout. It was almost as low as the record low of 2001. It was a little bit above that at 60%, and there's this and there's that, and they're losing people here and they're losing there. And she was just, I don't know what her voting inclinations were, whether she was just excited. And she just went, Labour have smashed it. And I was like, oh, that's what you need. Somebody who's genuinely like, something really big is happening here. And I'm not going to caveat it and put a cloud over it. She's going to say, this is actually a historic result. And the Tories have had their worst result ever. And I wanted somebody to do that. So I enjoyed that. I also salute the indefatigability of the panel, who, unlike our live stream, were not being swapped out. Mm-hmm. Andy Burnham, in full former professional footballer mode, just goes, they played a great game of always attacking, but also very, 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 very strong defence, always a lot of possession. And Ruth Davidson, and Trevor Phillips, and it was like they never went. They didn't even go to the toilet, as far as I could tell.
Yikes.
They were just unbelievable. It was like they were just being held at gunpoint. There were like no more people were allowed. Every now and then Auntie Selden popped up. Which were you watching?
Well, I have to confess, I spent so much time in this very room or in the Tabernacle that I didn't actually watch that much. I absorbed most of what I absorbed of the election on the phone on my knee or on this little iPad here. So I saw surprisingly little.
Weren't you assigned a channel, though, when you were on the stream?
Yeah, but it was basic. I had the BBC's, and it was actually not captivating, I've got to say.
Did you watch any of the telly?
Yeah, I watched some of it when I got back from the live show, and I went to the BBC because I have a primitive loyalty to the BBC because I did used to work there. But you're right. It was a bit lacking in energy, and as we mentioned earlier, the early emphasis on reform was depressing, and there was a lot of time filling, which was frustrating. So I wish now that I'd gone with Sky instead.
Channel 4 was good.
I tell you what I did watch, looking over Zoe Grunwald's shoulder, was a fair bit of GB News with the sound off, which looked insane. They looked like they'd taken the inspiration for their election coverage from WAF wrestling. They had an Elvis impersonator. They had the horrendous Michelle Dewberry rattling around as if commentating on, The Undertaker versus China White or whatever. It was mad. I can see it really playing quite well with their audience.
One thing I want to learn from Kay Burley was that basically anytime a result came in and somebody would be, as the host of, sometime host of this podcast, and someone's making a point and I kind of would like to move on and I'm just subtly hinting or whatever. And somebody would be literally midpoint, a result would come in and Kay Burley was like, I'm going to stop you there. Because we're going to Bolsover or whatever. And they were just like, oh, shit, she's not messing about. There was just this kind of like abrupt, like, stuff's going on.
Full Chris Morris.
Yeah.
Shut up, Chris. Shut up, Peter.
I liked the energy. I would be really intrigued to see what other people thought. But every time someone suggested turning over to the BBC, I was looking on Twitter and people were like really dissatisfied. They said it was not a good
I
vibe.
Really wish I'd been able to see Nadine Dorries versus Alistair Campbell, because apparently this was the early evening delight. Yeah. Nadine, a very bad selection, apparently, by all accounts. Why have you got this? A, discredited. B, mad. C, shall we say, somewhat loose and out of control person up against Campbell.
It was a big night for political podcasters.
Yeah,
who aren't us.
Because there was for us.
There was Campbell and Stewart. No, but on TV.
Yeah.
Because there's Campbell and Stewart on one screen, and on the other screen there was George Osborne and Ned Balls.
Yeah,
and I was just like, I think I've had enough of.
You've had enough of podcasters.
I've had enough of podcasters. Especially even in this room, I had enough of myself.
Fair
frankly,
yeah.
So Andrew, obviously, the reason why one spends hours and hours and hours watching television is for those Portillo moments. 11 ministers lost their jobs. This is 4 more than in 1997. But the focus on ministers is misleading because, of course, it's much more exciting to see, Steve Baker or Miriam Cates or Jonathan Gullis lose than Alex Chalk. Yeah. Nobody's got an opinion on Alex Chalk. So like, Alex, were you up for chalk? Nobody cares. So it was almost like some of the villains of the last, 7 years of Romaniac / oh God, what now? Who were you? We've mentioned Mog. Mm-hmm. Who else were you just very pleased to see go?
Obviously, I was delighted to see Liz Truss go. Even though I didn't actually, I had to watch it afterwards on replay because I went to bed and then she went.
Did you see her walk off?
That's on the replay. That she just seemed stunned. Her utter lack of human connection. She makes C-3PO look like Oliver Reed. She has got no human valency whatsoever. She looked like, I believe the Australians called it a stunned mullet, and just turned around and just beetled off.
Well, fair play to Penny Mordaunt, who is not one of those Tories that I have particularly gleeful hatred for. You know, not my politics, but I wasn't like, yes. And she did give a very good dignified loser's speech.
You know who else
There's something
did?
to be said for that.
To my amazement, Grant Shapps' loser's speech, I thought was
it?
pretty kind of on point. He was like, he said, the blah, blah, the election's about trust and elections. And he said, and I believe he really meant this, the Tories have lost it. He didn't say the Tories have lost your trust.
Wow.
The Tories have lost it. And we all know what that means. And I think that was a real, like when somebody you strongly dislike goes, you know what, fuck this, and tells the truth. I was quite impressed by that. But I also got to say, I loved the incomprehending face of Jonathan Gullis when he got his. He didn't really do anything useful. He just stood there with his eyes wandering around. What is happening? I don't understand. Beam me up. That was good.
Ros, I know you weren't up all night to get trussy, but apart from her, which yes, you caught her in the morning, didn't you?
Yeah.
Was there anybody that you basically, when you woke up, that you heard had lost, that you were just like, oh, good? Like, even if you weren't there for the moment.
Oh, yeah, Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, it just has to be Mogg. He just so much personifies the most awful, complacent tendencies, the arrogance of parts of the Conservative Party. Not all the Conservative Party, but the very, very worst elitist aspect of it. And so I was delighted that he's gone.
Well, I was with around Ian Dunt's house, and he was like, he had these obviously like these personal vendettas, and he leapt. So you think you're going to leap up for Mogg and Truss, right? He leapt up for Mark Harper.
What?
And I was like, I don't think I like Mark Harper, but I can't remember what he's done that would make me this angry. And he was just like, yes, get in.
Yikes.
And there was some very exciting ones where it was actually quite, whether it was very close, which was exciting, or whether it wasn't close, like with Mogg, it was actually a few thousand.
Yeah.
And so there was this like constant drama where you're kind of like, it's whether it's a surprise mixed with how much you hate them, mixed with how they react. And after a while, I was just overwhelmed. I was like, the hits keep coming.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'd love to have seen like Braverman go, or Badenoch, or Jenrick, or anyone from the right. But you can't have it all.
You know what it felt like? In all great stories, in all great series, the series finale, when the hero has been beaten and beaten and beaten and beaten, and then in the final reel, the bad guys start to go down one by one by one. It was the end of Endgame.
It was the end.
And I was like, I was quite emotional.
And I can believe some people just going, well, it's very sad that so-and-so kept their scene. It's like, just take the win, man.
Yeah.
You can't get them all. They're not Pokemon.
And also, in every single season finale, some of the bad guys get away because for season 2.
For the sequel.
You always see a little Cyberman escapes at some point.
2 fun Truss facts. She lost to the biggest Tory to Labour swing in history, I believe, of 26%, having already, that record had already been broken a few times that night. And she's the first former PM to lose, I hope I've got this right, for almost 100 years.
I was trying to find another Prime Minister who'd lost their seat. I couldn't find
Ramsay
one.
MacDonald did, I think, in the 30s.
Blimey.
I think that would be the last one. Hopefully. I'm not one of those. Who's the guy who's got all the facts? Who's on TV? Is it John Curtis?
Probably,
John Curtis
He'd
would know
that.
If you're listening, love, phone
Give
in.
us a shout.
Give us a shout. Ros, just to finish right. So the big story of the night is that Labour won a landslide, and then we have a new government, right? Let's not lose sight of that. So he talked a lot about service. He also talked about, in full-on, like, nuclear strength centrist dad mode, stability and moderation. Like, he's not the most inspiring orator generally. With this speech and the one, I'm sure if you saw the one that he'd sort of delivered in the middle of the night, there's a little bit of overlap, a little bit of reusing material. I'm fine with that. Do you think he struck the right note?
Yeah, I think he did. Can I just say, first of all, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, and regular listeners will know that I can be quite an incredible cynic at times. But this was a really good speech. It hit absolutely the right note for the time. Because I think the key to it was that he didn't actually promise anything concrete. As in, he didn't say, I'm going to stop the boats, or I'm going to save the NHS. Well, not in so many words. There wasn't the concrete stuff. There was a commitment to start work at doing this stuff. And I think that was the best way to try to win over the large number of people who did want some kind of change in this country, but who didn't vote Labour, or who may have voted tactically and perhaps aren't completely convinced by him. And he talked a lot about. He was basically one big trust me. And of course, political campaigns are, saying, trust me. But now it was as if now that he was standing outside number 10, he has won the election, he felt he had the right to say, trust me, and move forward. And this isn't going to happen immediately. We will start doing stuff immediately. We're gonna act very fast, but you're not necessarily going to feel it immediately. And there was also, which I thought was really interesting in the light of an Oh God, What Now episode from a couple of weeks ago with Peter Kellner and Ralph Baer that some listeners may remember. And Peter Kellner suggested in that podcast that it would be important for Starmer to present the work of rebuilding Britain as a mission that everyone should be part of. And it wasn't just down to him. It wasn't just down to the party. It was something everybody had to do. And he described that as Churchillian, blood, toil, sweat and tears, all that vibe. And there was a nod to that at one point in the speech as well, when he said, I invite you to join me in the work of rebuilding, I paraphrase, rebuilding Britain. And that was really interesting. And I haven't heard that from a politician for an extremely long time. It was a new dynamic.
It wasn't my lot one.
It wasn't my lot one, and I'm going to fix this now, and I'm going to do this now. It was a suggestion that actually we had to work all, and that was, it's kind of the anti-cynicism, isn't it? The anti-cynicism of the last 14 years.
Andrew, there was a bit, I think in the middle of the night speech, where it was, they passed the magic 326, and he did this lovely little passage about sunshine. The sunshine's coming. He goes, pale at first, which I assumed had been inserted by Rachel Reeves because she said, we haven't got enough budget for bright sunshine.
Yeah.
So and I thought, this is really interesting because it's not quite, a new dawn has broken, has it not? It's not quite where there is strife, let us bring harmony or whatever. It was basically going, look, this is hard and it's going to take a while, but we'll get there. And it was, we talked so much about how after Brexit and after sort of Corbyn's manifestos that there's a real danger in overpromising. And we're going to do all this stuff. And we felt maybe it's uninspiring and he's underpromising, and you can look at turnout and you can look at this and that and the other. But, he won, Labour won handsomely. And so I wondered whether we are seeing this kind of, there's something very, very consistent.
Yeah.
That the speech reflected the campaign, reflected the man of like, life is hard and complicated and it will take a while, but let's sort of work together and try and be decent.
Yeah.
Did you work for you?
I was, and I'm actually going to go a bit now. I was in tears on Newington Green because it's like, for the first time in 14 years, somebody is treating us like we've got capabilities, that we can do it. You might not be aware of the Jurgen Klopp line, doubters into believers. And we have been invited to believe in ourselves, that we can do it. And after all of the cynicism and the self-dealing and the lies, as you can tell, it's kind of got me. I am an emotional weakling.
Yeah, I know. I mean, well, if anyone can appreciate a footballing metaphor, it's Keir Starmer.
Yes.
Well, I felt bad for the people, today and last night who could not take the win.
Yeah.
Who were looking, and this isn't just people who hate Starmer, this is people who are just like, pathologically gloomy, where they were just like, oh, well, And I said, what an amazing result. And people were going, yeah, but, they really messed up in Chingford and Woodford Green. And it's like, yes, that's true. But can we just concentrate on the win?
Yeah.
And we should say, of course, as the podcast goes forward, we will, unfortunately, we won't have Rishi Sunak to kick around anymore. And there will be a lot of, we will have to, hold to account's rather pompous, but we will have to sort of point out, the mistakes and the disappointments and the flaws in this government, and root for the results we want, and sort of, I've got a lot of there's reasons for faith. There's a lot of people I really admire who will be coming into the cabinet. Some of them former guests on this podcast. But there will, of course, be things to sort of to criticize, and then things to worry about, and what are the threats to Labour come the next election. But I mean, I just think that there has to be something a little bit broken if you can't just go, oh, you know what? For the first time in 27 years, we've kicked the Tories out.
But more than that, it's not just we've kicked the Tories out. So for the first time in 14 years, we've got somebody who might be boring. I don't mind boring. I'm quite boring myself. But is at least being honest with us and is not approaching this as a self-serving, factional, self-dealing thing. It was an invitation for everybody to join in and for everyone to believe, not just in themselves, but in one another. And I found that, as you've just heard, immensely moving. We're not going to get what we wanted from this. He thinks we're not going to rejoin the EU in his lifetime. Who knows? But I do think, in some small measure, what happened yesterday, we did a bit of it. The people that listen, the people in our world, we did a little bit of it. We helped get it a bit over the line. So it is the victory of the people listening to this podcast as well.
It's just,
well done.
Just enjoy the moment and don't think of all the things that could go wrong and that will disappoint you. And I just think it is such a thing. Just remember what the Tories and the Brexiters were like in December 2019.
Yeah.
They weren't instantly going, oh, well, it's an 80-seat majority, but it's pretty fragile and we could lose it. And actually, Boris Johnson wasn't that popular. These things these things were true.
Yeah.
But they were like, I mean, they were dicks about it, but don't be a dick about it. But, please just allow yourself to be celebratory, because that is what the people on the right do every fucking time. They do not destroy their own good times with doubt and doom. And there will be plenty of time for that in the future. Yeah. But for now, you know what? They're out. We got GTO. Labour did it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to anyone who turned up to the live show last night, who watched the live stream, who watched our TV station-esque live stream
OG
late into the night. Patreon backers, everyone I've ever met,
panelists, past, present, and future.
I'd like to thank the Academy.
Yeah,
and and we will see you in the new era.